I was given 5 minutes to clear my desk before my father-in-law, Edward Collins, the CEO, fired me in front of the entire leadership team. Instead of breaking, I smiled and said, "Thank you." One by one, 25 colleagues quietly stood and followed me out. Sophie Reed sneered until the legal director turned pale and whispered, "Get the lawyer." Now. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. 4 minutes and 30 seconds left, Edward announced to the room, his Omega watch glinting as he tapped its face. I kept packing my desk drawer, pulling out 6 years of work, project files, team photos, and the backup drive that contained every system architecture I had ever built for Helio Systems. 12 executives watched in silence as I placed each item carefully into a cardboard box. Sophie leaned back in her chair, examining her manicured nails with practiced boredom. She thought she had already won. After a few minutes, Edward called out again, his voice sharp with authority. That was when Daniel Hayes stood up from his desk outside the conference room's glass wall, his laptop bag already in his hand. But I should explain how we got here. How 3 weeks of calculated betrayal led to this moment when my father-in-law was counting down my professional execution like a microwave timer. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that dedication and hard work should be valued over office politics, please consider subscribing. It helps more people discover these important stories. Now, let's see what Edward had planned. It started at Sunday dinner at the Collins estate, where we gathered like actors in a play no one wanted to perform anymore. I had arrived with Ryan and my homemade apple pie, the one with the lattice crust that took 2 hours to perfect. Margaret always requested it but never said who made it, as if pies appeared out of thin air, or perhaps courtesy of the household staff. "Another record quarter for Helio Systems," Edward proclaimed, standing at the head of the mahogany dining table that could seat 20 but usually held only the 4 of us, drowning in its own excess. He raised his crystal tumbler, the whiskey inside catching the light from Margaret's precious Viennese chandelier. "We're dominating the market because I know how to recognize talent and put it where it belongs." His hand landed on Ryan's shoulder with the full weight of expectation and inheritance. My husband glowed under the attention, though his contribution to the company consisted mostly of having the right last name and showing up to meetings he didn't understand. No one mentioned the Anderson account I had saved 2 nights before, or the Carter Technologies contract I had recovered after working through 3 consecutive weekends, or the fact that while Edward was at his monthly whiskey tasting at the country club, detecting notes of oak and self-importance, I was rebuilding our entire server infrastructure after a critical failure. "You look tired, dear," Margaret murmured, her fingers sparkling with enough diamonds to fund my entire department's salaries, as she brushed my shoulder lightly. "Perhaps you should think about better work-life balance. Appearance matters, especially for women in leadership." I swallowed my response along with my overcooked salmon. The truth was, I looked tired because I had been awake for 36 hours straight. But admitting that would only prove their unspoken point, that I couldn't handle the pressure, that I was, as Sophie would later write, overwhelmed. Our morning routine had become a quiet study in disconnection. Every day began the same way, Ryan fumbling with the expensive espresso machine his parents had given us, producing coffee that tasted like burnt disappointment while scrolling through sports news on his phone. "Big week ahead," he asked that particular Tuesday, 2 weeks before everything imploded. "I should hear about the promotion today." I watched his reflection tense in the microwave door. "Right, the promotion." He took a sip of his failed latte. "Dad mentioned Sophie's been really impressive lately. She's been staying late and taking on extra projects." My fingers froze above my laptop keyboard. Sophie Reed, who arrived at 9:30 sharp and left at 5 o'clock on the dot. Sophie, the woman I had been training for 3 months at Edward's personal request. "She just needs mentoring," he had said, "someone to show her how we do things here." So I did. I opened my playbook, shared my strategies, and explained our client relationships with the patience of a kindergarten teacher. She took careful notes in her designer notebook, asking questions that grew increasingly invasive. How do you handle system failures? What's your backup protocol? Who has administrative access? I thought she was eager to learn. It turned out she was building a case. The server migration crisis should have been my moment of vindication. 7 days before Edward would slam his palm on that conference table, our entire data infrastructure needed an emergency migration, 40 terabytes, an 8-hour window, zero margin for error. Everything went wrong at once: corrupted files, failed backups, a power surge that should have been impossible. By 10 p.m., I had activated my emergency protocol, calling in my entire team. Daniel arrived first, still wearing the program from his daughter Ella's dance recital pinned to his shirt. She understands, he had said quietly, though I caught him watching the videos his wife had sent from the auditorium. Laila Patel came next, apology heavy in her voice as she called her husband. I know it's our anniversary dinner. I'll make it up to you. She had ended the call and dove into the code like she was defusing a nuclear weapon. Then came Ethan Ross, Chloe Park, and the Carter twins, Alex and Jamie, who communicated in what seemed like their own private programming language. They all came without question. The conference room became our bunker, covered in laptops, energy drinks, and eventually Chinese takeout that went cold before we could eat it. We're like some weird dysfunctional family, Ethan had joked at 2 a.m., trying to eat lo mein with one hand while typing with the other. Yeah, but at least we chose each other, Chloe had replied. And something about those words felt prophetic. By the end, we had saved everything, every file, every client, every contract. Edward would never know that we had been 3 keystrokes away from losing millions in data and trust. That was what I did, solve catastrophes so quietly that no one even realized they had happened. Then came the email, the misdirected message that revealed everything. I had been reviewing the Anderson account files at 11:47 p.m., preparing my presentation for the promotion, when an email appeared from Sophie Reed to me. Except it wasn't meant for me. Edward, as discussed, I've successfully salvaged the Anderson situation. The client was thoroughly impressed with my crisis management. I believe it's time to discuss restructuring. She seems overwhelmed, arrives looking exhausted most mornings. Perhaps fresh leadership would benefit the department. The Anderson situation, the one I had personally managed while Sophie was posting Instagram stories from a wine tasting. The rescue I had orchestrated while she slept. I forwarded it to my personal email without even thinking, some primitive instinct for self-preservation kicking in. Then I sat in my home office, still wearing the coffee-stained blouse I had put on 18 hours earlier, realizing finally that dedication looks like weakness to people who have never truly worked. 3 minutes, Edward announced now, his voice cutting through my memory. The executives remained frozen, but through the glass, I saw Lila stand up, then Ethan, then Chloe. One by one, my team, my chosen family, began to rise. 2 minutes, Edward called out, but his voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see the entire 15th floor frozen in disbelief. Chloe Park had her phone halfway to her ear. The Carter twins stood at their adjoining desks, identical shock written across their faces. I reached for the framed photo from our last team celebration, the one where we had worked 72 hours straight to launch the Patterson project. My fingers brushed against something else, a USB drive taped underneath my desk drawer, the one where I had backed up every email, every document, every piece of evidence that might matter someday. Apparently, someday was today. I walked into the building at 6:45 that morning, and it already felt wrong. The security guard, usually cheerful, wouldn't meet my eyes. The elevator was too quiet. When I stepped onto the 15th floor, the air felt heavy, as if the entire space were holding its breath. When I entered the conference room to set up my presentation, the one showing our department's 340% efficiency increase, Sophie was already there, sitting in my seat, the same one I had claimed 3 years earlier because it faced away from the morning sun. Her laptop was open to spreadsheets I recognized immediately, our confidential budget projections, stored on a secure server she should never have been able to access. "Oh, good morning," she said, her tone coated in artificial sweetness. "Edward asked me to review these before the meeting. You don't mind, do you?" It wasn't really a question, and we both knew it. I stood there, my laptop bag heavy on my shoulder, watching her scroll through salary allocations, project budgets, vendor contracts, 6 years of financial architecture I had built from the ground up. "How did you get access to those files?" I asked. She looked up, and for a split second, the mask slipped. Pure satisfaction flickered across her face before the innocence returned. "Edward gave me temporary admin access to help with the transition." Transition. The word hung between us like a diagnosis. The room filled slowly, but something felt off. Michael Cho from finance arrived first, gripping his tablet like a shield and avoiding my eyes. Then came Olivia Grant, our legal director, who usually radiated composure, but today she kept checking her phone, clutching her legal pad so tightly her knuckles turned white. Even the coffee was wrong. Normally, someone would have started the expensive espresso machine by now, the one that ground beans fresh for every cup. Today, there was only silence, mixed with the scent of nervous sweat and too much cologne. I started my presentation anyway, clicking through slides of our achievements, our metrics, our wins. My voice stayed steady even as I felt the energy in the room shift, darken, preparing for something I couldn't yet name. "As you can see, we've exceeded every target by..." The door didn't just open. It exploded inward, the handle slamming into the wall hard enough to leave a mark. Edward Collins stood there, his face flushed red, the same color it turned when his blood pressure medication failed him. His Italian suit, usually immaculate, was disheveled, his tie crooked. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and slammed his palm on the table so hard that coffee jumped in every cup. Olivia's actually spilled, a pool of brown liquid spreading across her legal pad, but she didn't move to wipe it. "You have 5 minutes to clear your desk," Edward said. The words didn't register at first. They hung in the air, unreal, while my brain refused to process them. I stood frozen, the presentation clicker still in my hand, slide 17 still glowing behind me, a graph showing how much money I had saved this company. And suddenly I understood the choreography of the entire morning, why Sophie had my files, why the executives avoided my gaze, why Olivia looked ready to cry or run or both. This wasn't spontaneous. It was orchestrated. I had been marked for execution, and everyone but me knew it was coming. Sophie leaned back in my chair, and I saw it, the small curve of her lips, the ease in her posture, the way she admired her manicure with smug satisfaction. She thought she had won. But 2 decades in tech had taught me something important: the moment you think you've won is when you're most exposed. Michael's fingers were flying over his calculator with the panic of someone watching money vanish. I knew that look. I'd seen it during budget crises and contract disputes, whenever numbers were about to turn catastrophic. Olivia's hands were trembling as she typed on her phone, her face pale as paper. They both understood something Edward and Sophie didn't: the costly difference between firing someone privately and publicly humiliating them in front of witnesses. I set the clicker down carefully. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. She had survived the Great Depression and raised 6 kids alone after my grandfather died. "Never let anyone see you break," she once told me, peeling potatoes with hands that never shook. "When they expect you to fall apart, that's when you stand the tallest." "Thank you," I said. The words came out clear, calm, almost sincere, because in that moment, I felt something unexpected: relief. 6 years of pretending Ryan's family accepted me. 6 years of Margaret's backhanded compliments about my looks while I saved her husband's company. 6 years of fixing every crisis, but never being enough to belong. Edward's jaw went slack. He had expected tears, maybe rage, but not gratitude. Behind him, A few executives exchanged uneasy glances. Someone's pen rolled off the table and hit the floor like a gunshot. In the silence that followed, I began to pack with the precision I used when designing system architectures, each item lifted, checked, and placed carefully into the cardboard box that had appeared from somewhere. The backup drive went in first, then the project files, the team photo, my chipped coffee mug. 1 minute, Edward called, but his voice had lost its edge. Confusion crept into it, the first crack in his certainty. Through the glass, I saw movement. Daniel Hayes was standing at his desk, laptop bag already slung over his shoulder. He wasn't packing. He was already ready. Then Lila stood. Then Ethan. One by one, like a slow-building wave, my entire team rose from their desks. Edward turned to see what I was looking at, and his face went from red to white so fast I thought he might faint. Sophie's expression shifted, from triumph to confusion to something close to fear. "Time's up," Edward said, but it came out like a question. I picked up my box, 6 years reduced to what I could carry in my arms. As I walked toward the door, 2 security guards appeared. "Standard protocol for terminations," one murmured apologetically. Ben Carter and his partner Derek, I had brought them coffee during late-night lockdowns, knew their kids' names. "I'm sorry about this," Tom whispered. "Don't be," I said. "You're just doing your job." We walked through the cubicle maze toward the elevator. That's when the symphony began, the squeak of chairs, the rustle of bags being packed, the soft thuds of laptops closing. Daniel fell into step beside me. Then Lila, her heels clicking with determination. Ethan followed, then Chloe, then the Carter twins moving in perfect sync. By the time we reached the elevator, 25 people had joined the procession. Tom stopped walking, his hand dropping from my elbow. "In 15 years, he said, his voice thick with something between awe and respect, "I've never seen anything like this." Neither had Edward Collins, whose empire had just begun to collapse, though he wouldn't realize it for another 48 hours. The elevator doors closed on 25 people, and one security guard who looked as if he'd just witnessed a miracle, or a massacre. He couldn't tell which. Tom pressed the lobby button, his hands shaking slightly. No one spoke as we descended. The only sounds were the hum of the elevator and the steady buzz of phones vibrating, first mine, then Daniel's, then Lila's. Like popcorn beginning to pop. By the time the doors opened in the lobby, our phones were erupting in a cascade of notifications. We stepped into the bright midday sun, the kind of light that makes everything look overexposed and unreal. The receptionist stood up so fast her chair rolled back into the wall. Ben Carter, the maintenance supervisor, stopped mopping and just watched us file past in silence. Someone began a slow clap from the loading dock. I couldn't see who it was, and then others joined until the sound echoed against the parking garage walls. "This is insane," Lila whispered beside me. "This is justice," Daniel said, shifting his laptop bag on his shoulder. We stood there in the parking lot, 23 people blinking in the harsh sunlight, our phones buzzing like angry wasps. Alex and Jamie Carter were already on their laptops, sitting on the concrete median and typing furiously. Chloe had her phone pressed to her ear, explaining to someone, probably her partner, why she was suddenly unemployed at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning. "I should go," I said to no one in particular. My car keys felt strange in my hand. "We all should," Ethan replied, but nobody moved. We stood like survivors of a shipwreck, not quite ready to leave the site of the vessel going down. The drive home took 17 minutes. I know because I stared at the clock the whole way, unable to focus on anything else. My phone lay in the passenger seat, buzzing non-stop. 3 times at red lights I reached for it, and 3 times I pulled my hand back. Ryan's car was in the driveway. Of course he worked from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a luxury Edward had granted his son but never would have considered for anyone else, especially not me, despite my longer tenure and higher position. I sat in my car for a full minute, engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. The house we had bought 3 years ago with his parents' help for the down payment looked exactly the same as when I left that morning. The same cherry tree stood in the front yard. The same crack in the driveway we kept meaning to fix. The same life, except everything had changed. Ryan met me at the door, his laptop still in one hand, confusion written across his face. Behind him, I could see his home office setup, dual monitors glowing with spreadsheets he probably didn't understand. "Why are you home? Are you sick?" Then he noticed the box in my arms. His face cycled through expressions like flipping TV channels: confusion, concern, realization, anger. "Dad called," he said flatly. "He says you lost control during the meeting, said you were unstable, that you started crying. Had to be escorted out by security." I set the box on our entryway table, the one his mother had given us that I had always thought was too ornate for the space. "Is that what he said?" I asked. "He said you've been struggling lately, that Sophie had to cover for your mistakes, that he had no choice." I pulled out my phone, ignored the 100 other notifications, and found the forwarded email, Sophie's email, the one claiming credit for the Anderson account, the one calling me overwhelmed, clearly part of a longer conversation with Edward I hadn't seen. Ryan read it once, then again. His jaw muscle twitched, the tell he had inherited from his father when reality didn't match the narrative he'd been fed. "When did she send this?" he started, then stopped. 3 weeks ago. Accidentally sent to me instead of your father. And you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me? Or would you have said Sophie made an honest mistake, that your father would never plot against his own daughter-in-law? The silence stretched between us like a contested border. Ryan set down his laptop, ran both hands through his hair, another inherited gesture. "I need to think," he said, grabbing his keys from the hook by the door. I just need to think, Ryan." But he was already gone, the door closing with a decisive click that sounded like punctuation. I stood in our entryway, still in my work clothes, surrounded by the life we had built on a foundation that was apparently sand. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but instinct, exhaustion, and morbid curiosity made me swipe accept. "Please don't hang up." It was Olivia Grant's voice, barely above a whisper. "I'm calling from the bathroom. The executive bathroom on 16, the one nobody uses. Claire, your contract, the clause about hostile termination, Edward never read it. Legal reviewed it 6 years ago when you were hired, but he just signed where I told him to sign." Her words tumbled out like water breaking through a dam. "The humiliation multiplier alone puts your severance at $900,000. But with documented harassment, the public nature of it, 22 witnesses, we're looking at millions." Millions. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. In the background I could hear running water. "Because in about an hour Edward is going to realize what he's done. And when he does, he's going to blame me, say I should have warned him. I've worked here 12 years. I've covered for his temper, his affairs, his questionable decisions. But this is going to end my career. Olivia, can we meet tomorrow? Somewhere nobody from Helios would go? I have documentation, things you should know, things that might help us both." The call ended before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, when it immediately buzzed again. It was Dylan from my team, my former team, sending a screenshot. A Slack channel called The Exodus, with 247 members before it got shut down. The messages were a flood of disbelief, support, and panic. Did this really happen? 22 people walked out? What do we do now? Is the Anderson project dead? Who's going to maintain the servers? My LinkedIn app showed 47 notifications. Emails poured in. 3 competitors had already reached out with variations of, "Heard the news, let's talk." But one email made me stop breathing. Victoria Hayes, the venture capitalist who had turned down Edward's pitch 6 months ago, telling him his company lacked innovative leadership. Her message contained 2 sentences. Your team's loyalty is worth more than Helios's entire market cap. Let's build something. I was reading it for the 3rd time when the doorbell rang. Margaret Collins stood on my porch at 9 p.m., makeup smudged, holding a manila folder like it might bite her. May I come in? Margaret asked. And for the first time in 6 years, she looked fragile, not the polished society matron who commanded charity boards and country club committees, but a woman carrying weight she could no longer bear alone. I stepped aside. She entered my home, the home she had helped fund but never truly welcomed me into, and stood awkwardly in the entryway, clutching that manila folder like a confession. Ryan's not here, I said. I know. I waited until I saw him leave. She followed me to the living room, sitting on the edge of our couch as if she might need to flee at any moment. Edward fired his own brother this way 20 years ago. George, he was CFO, had been with the company since the beginning. She opened the folder, revealing yellowed board meeting minutes and old emails printed on paper that had softened with age. George questioned one of Edward's decisions publicly, not even criticized, just questioned. Edward gave him 10 minutes to clear out. The family never recovered. George's wife left him. His kids won't speak to Edward. 20 years and the wound still bleeds at every holiday. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Margaret's laugh was bitter, nothing like her usual musical society trill. Because I've watched my husband destroy people for decades, telling myself it was just business, that successful men had to be ruthless. But watching him do it to you, someone who saved his company while he was playing golf, someone who made my son happy even if we never showed it, I can't pretend anymore. She pulled out another paper. This is from 5 years ago. Lauren Blake, VP of Marketing, fired in a board meeting for insubordination. She had only suggested Edward's strategy was outdated. Another paper, 3 years ago. Anthony Liu, head of innovation, terminated publicly because he had received a job offer from a competitor and Edward wanted to make an example. Margaret looked directly at me. They choose the easy path, Edward and Ryan both. They avoid conflict by creating bigger conflicts. They would rather destroy relationships than admit they were wrong. I enabled it for 35 years, and I am sorry. Her hug was unexpected, fierce, and brief. She left the folder on my coffee table and disappeared into the night, leaving me with evidence of a pattern I had been too close to see. My phone rang at 2:07 a.m. I had finally fallen asleep on the couch, still in my work clothes, the folder's contents spread across the coffee table like a crime scene. Please tell me you are awake. Olivia Grant's voice was high with panic. I am now. Sophie destroyed everything. She tried to prove she could handle your systems, to show Edward she did not need a transition period. She went for the backup files and deleted the main customer database instead. I bolted upright, fully awake. She deleted the entire customer database. That is not the worst part. She tried to recover it herself. She did not call IT. She did not follow protocol. She ran some recovery tool she found online, and it corrupted everything. The entire East Coast operation has been dark for 6 hours. They are estimating at least 14 hours before even a partial restoration. Silence stretched while I processed it. Our customer database was not just names and addresses. It was 17 years of relationship management, purchase histories, custom configurations, support tickets, the DNA of the company's client relationships. How much? I asked. Conservative estimate, $50 million in immediate losses. That does not include the clients we will lose, the lawsuits, the reputational damage. Olivia's voice cracked. She has been in the bathroom crying for 2 hours. Edward has been screaming at everyone. He threw a laptop, actually threw it at the wall. Security is on standby. I felt something I did not expect, nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a cold, empty nothing. Sophie had engineered my humiliation, and now she was drowning in her own incompetence. Olivia, document everything. Every email, every action, every word Edward says. Already doing it. I am creating my own insurance policy. She paused. Your team could have prevented this. My team would not have caused it in the first place. After Olivia hung up, I sat in the dark and watched the first light creep across my living room walls. Somewhere across town, Helios Systems bled money and reputation while Sophie learned that taking credit and taking responsibility are very different things. Ryan came home at 7 a.m., looking like he had slept in his car. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair stuck out at odd angles, and he carried the stale scent of whiskey and regret. The database is gone, he said, without preamble. I heard. Dad has lost his mind. He is threatening to sue Sophie, but legal says he cannot because he gave her the access. He is calling emergency board meetings. Mom has had 2 panic attacks. He sank onto the couch beside me, careful not to touch me. He wants me to convince you to sign an NDA and make this go away quietly. Make what go away? His public humiliation of me, the 22 people who walked out, or the fact that his chosen replacement just cost the company $50 million. Ryan rubbed his face with both hands. All of it. He is offering the $900,000 Olivia mentioned. Full severance, extended benefits, glowing recommendation. All you have to do is sign that you will not discuss what happened or compete for 2 years. No. The board is threatening his position. If you sue, if this gets worse, he could lose everything. I looked at my husband, really looked. A stranger wearing Ryan's face and speaking in Ryan's voice. The man I married, who promised to stand by me and be my partner, was gone, if he had ever existed. He should have thought of that before he gave me 5 minutes to clear my desk. I need you to fix this. Those 5 words hung between us like a blade. Not I am sorry. Not he was wrong. Not I should have defended you. Just another demand that I trade my dignity for the Collins family's comfort. I need you to leave, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Ryan looked at me, and for a moment I saw something, awareness, maybe, that he had chosen the wrong side. But Collins' men did not admit mistakes, they just found someone to blame. He left without another word. And I knew our marriage ended in that moment, even if the paperwork would come later. By noon, my living room had turned into a startup incubator, 22 people with laptops balanced on their knees, sitting on the floor, perched on chair arms, crowding around my dining table. Daniel's 12-year-old daughter, Ella, sat in the corner doing homework, glancing up at the chaos with curious eyes. Aurora Tech, Lila announced, holding up a napkin where she had sketched a logo, a stylized bird rising from flames. We're not subtle, she said, but neither are they. Ethan's fingers flew over his keyboard. Domain secured. Social handles locked. I am grabbing variations before Helios, in case of cyber squatting, he added. His husband, Kevin, appeared with a tray of coffee mugs. I made a supply run. No one builds a company on an empty stomach. Pizza boxes piled up like sedimentary layers of ambition. The Carter twins had turned my living room wall into a project management system with sticky notes. Chloe was already working her contacts, her voice perfectly professional despite sitting cross-legged on my floor. We need incorporation documents, someone said. On it, Daniel replied, his brother-in-law, it turned out, was a corporate attorney. The energy was electric, desperate and hopeful. We were no longer just colleagues. We were refugees from a corporate disaster, building something new from the ashes Edward had created. And in that crowded, chaotic room, I felt more at home than I had in 6 years at Helios. My phone buzzed at 4:47 p.m., 3 days after we had transformed my living room into Aurora Tech's first headquarters. Mark Turner's number flashed, Edward's lawyer, calling for the third time that day. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Collins has authorized me to increase the offer to $900,000, he said, sounding like a man losing a war he thought would be easy. This is the baseline severance per your contract. The baseline assumes a normal termination, I said, watching the Carter twins carry equipment into what would become our actual office, a warehouse we found yesterday. Being given 5 minutes to clear my desk in front of 12 witnesses is not normal. Olivia Grant can verify that. A pause. Ms. Grant is no longer authorized to speak on behalf of Helios Systems. Of course she was not. Edward's reflex was always to shoot the messenger, even when the message described a legal disaster of his own making. Then we will let the courts decide what is appropriate. My lawyer will be in touch. I ended the call just as a white BMW pulled into the warehouse lot. Victoria Hayes stepped out, her designer heels clicking against cracked asphalt, surveying our space with the trained eye of someone who has turned dozens of startups into billion-dollar companies. The converted warehouse in Fulton Market was nothing special, 20,000 square feet of concrete impossibility that still smelled of industrial cleaner and the ghost of whatever used to be made there. Fluorescent lights flickered. The loading dock door would not shut properly. A suspicious stain on the floor looked like it had developed its own ecosystem. This is perfect, Victoria announced, and she was not being sarcastic. It is a disaster, Lila countered, pointing at a ceiling tile that chose that moment to sprinkle dust. No, it is hungry space. It wants to become something. Victoria walked the perimeter, her footsteps echoing. You know what Amazon's first office was? A garage. Google? A garage. Also a garage. You have already upgraded, you have walls and everything. She pulled out her phone and made a quick call. Send the contract to my email. Yes, the full amount. She looked at me. $3.5 million in seed funding. I want 20% equity and a board seat. Daniel nearly dropped his laptop. You have not even seen our business plan. I've seen 22 people follow their leader out of stable jobs and into uncertainty, Victoria said. That's worth more than any PowerPoint presentation. She paused at the door. Edward Collins once told me emotional decisions have no place in business. He said that when he rejected my proposal to invest in Helios Systems because he didn't like my negotiating style. She smiled faintly. Funny how his emotional decision to publicly humiliate you just handed me the next unicorn. The next morning, she returned with 2 other venture capitalists. They toured our disaster of a converted warehouse in Fulton Market, asked sharp questions about scalability and market penetration, and then committed another $2 million on the spot. We hadn't even incorporated yet, and Aurora Tech was already valued at $17.5 million. My phone hadn't stopped ringing, but the call that mattered came from Paul Anderson, the CEO of Anderson Dynamics. I heard about what happened at Helios, he said without preamble. And I also heard about the database meltdown. Sophie Reed tried explaining to me yesterday why our configurations were gone. She cried, actually cried, on a client call. Mr. Anderson, we've worked with your company for 3 years. You personally saw the systems we built. Daniel rebuilt your entire architecture over 1 weekend. Lila identified patterns that boosted efficiency by 200%. He paused for a moment. Contracts follow talent, not buildings. We're moving our business to Aurora Tech, effective immediately. By the end of that day, 3 more clients had called: Patterson Industries, Carter Technologies, and Lu Innovations. Together, they represented $30 million in annual contracts. Each of them announced their decision on LinkedIn, couched in polite corporate language that barely hid their disgust with how Helios had treated us. Stocks down another 5%, Chloe reported, refreshing her screen. That's 15% total since Tuesday. We were unpacking equipment and setting up actual desks, second-hand ones we'd bought from a failed startup, when Ryan appeared in the doorway. He looked smaller somehow, holding a bouquet of red roses. After 6 years of marriage, he still didn't know I was allergic to roses, that I preferred wildflowers, that I had told him this on our third date. "Can we talk?" he asked, shifting awkwardly in his pressed khakis and polo shirt, his father's uniform, worn without question. I stepped outside with him, leaving my team to keep building our future. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the cracked asphalt. "Dad's willing to apologize," he said, thrusting the roses toward me like a peace offering, or a shield. "He'll give you an executive position. Corner office, 20% raise, full benefits restored." I didn't take the flowers. "He thinks this is about office space?" "That's a good offer. More than fair, considering." "Considering what?" "That he humiliated me. That Sophie destroyed the database trying to prove she could do my job. That 22 people walked out because they witnessed something unconscionable." Ryan set the roses down between us. They looked sad there, already wilting on the hot asphalt. "He's my father," Ryan said softly. "And I was your wife," I answered. "Past tense, Ryan. You made it past tense the moment you asked me to swallow humiliation for your family's comfort." His face crumpled, the first real emotion I'd seen from him in days. "You're giving up on us? On our marriage?" "Your father didn't break us," I said quietly. "You did, when you came home and asked me to fix his mistake instead of standing by me. When you chose family loyalty over doing what's right." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the one who existed before his father's influence hardened around him like armor. But that man had been buried too long for resurrection. "I should go," he said. "Yes." He walked back to his car, the BMW his father had bought him, of course, and drove away. The roses stayed behind, petals already curling in the heat, scattering across the parking lot like all of Edward's carefully laid plans. At midnight, my phone buzzed with an encrypted file from Olivia Grant. The subject line read simply, "My severance package." It was a 43-minute audio recording of a Helios board meeting. The sound quality was perfect. She must have placed her phone at the center of the table. $50 million, said a voice I recognized as board member William Barrett. "He cost us $50 million because he couldn't control his temper. The database is completely corrupted." Another voice, Andrew Scott, the CFO, added, "Sophie Reed had no authorization to access those systems. Edward gave her full administrative rights." Then Olivia's calm voice, "Under legal advisement, I must clarify, this was an explicit decision by Mr. Collins." "You promoted your girlfriend's roommate," a male voice demanded, dripping with disbelief. "Rachel's roommate from college? That's who you thought could replace your daughter-in-law, the woman who built half of our infrastructure?" When Edward finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Sophie showed promise. She was eager. Ambitious. She was unqualified," someone snapped. The slam of a hand hit the table. "This isn't a family drama, Collins. You turned a personal vendetta into a $50 million disaster. Maybe more, if the clients keep leaving." I listened to the recording again, their voices echoing through my warehouse office at 1 a.m. "This isn't leadership," another board member said. "It's a temper tantrum that cost us $50 million. The disgust in their tones was unmistakable, even through a phone speaker. By the next morning, everything accelerated. "We're holding a press conference," Victoria Hayes announced, striding into the converted warehouse in Fulton Market at 7 a.m. with a media consultant and enough coffee for an army. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Every major tech outlet is begging for a statement. We're going to give them one." "I don't want to sound vindictive," I said. You won't, she replied. You'll sound exactly like what you are, a leader who refused to accept humiliation as the cost of employment. She pulled out her tablet. Meanwhile, Edward's planning his own conference at Helios headquarters at the exact same time. He's going to call this a strategic restructuring. The idea of Edward spinning this disaster into corporate jargon should have angered me, but instead, I felt calm. Let him try to polish this catastrophe. The truth has a way of showing through, no matter how thick the corporate varnish. We spent the next 24 hours preparing. Daniel and Lila helped write my statement. Chloe handled logistics. The Carter twins somehow found professional lighting and a backdrop that made our warehouse look like a real tech startup instead of an abandoned factory. At 1:45 the next afternoon, I stood in front of the cameras wearing the same navy blazer I'd worn that Tuesday. My team flanked me, 22 of them, dressed neatly but not identical. We looked like what we were, individuals who had chosen to stand together. Good afternoon, I began, my voice steadier than my pulse. 2 weeks ago, Edward Collins gave me 5 minutes to clear my desk after 6 years of building Helios Systems infrastructure. Those 5 minutes taught me something valuable, that competence threatens the incompetent, that loyalty means nothing to those who never earned it, and that sometimes the best thing that can happen is being forced to leave a place that never valued you. Camera shutters clicked like digital rain. Someone from TechCrunch was typing furiously. A Bloomberg reporter was live streaming. Aurora Tech isn't just a company, I continued. It's proof that culture beats strategy, that teams built on respect outperform hierarchies built on fear. We've secured $6 million in funding. We've retained clients worth $30 million annually. In 2 weeks, we've accomplished what Helios claimed would take years, because we have something they lost. I paused. Trust. Across town, my phone buzzed with messages from people watching Edward's simultaneous conference. Margaret sent a running commentary. He's sweating through his makeup. Sophie's behind him, scrolling her phone. She's literally job hunting during the press conference. He just said, strategic restructuring for enhanced agility, and a reporter laughed out loud. Someone shared a screenshot from one of the financial networks. They were showing both press conferences side by side. On one screen, I stood calm and steady, surrounded by my team. On the other, Edward Collins was red-faced and stammering, with Sophie sitting beside him, scrolling through LinkedIn as if she'd already given up pretending to care. The stock ticker ran along the bottom of both feeds, Helios Systems down another 8%. We were still celebrating that evening when my phone rang from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but instinct made me swipe. Please don't hang up, came Sophie's voice, but different. Gone was the sugar-sweet confidence, the practiced professionalism. She sounded young, terrified. I know you hate me, she said. I don't hate you, I replied, surprised by how true it felt. I nothing you. A sharp inhale. I've been terminated. Strategic differences, they called it, but everyone knows it means I destroyed the database. I'm being blacklisted. No one will even interview me. She was crying now, ugly, broken sobs that reminded me she was only 26, ambitious and ruthless, but still young enough to believe those were the only traits that mattered. I have student loans, rent, my mom's medical bills. She's sick, and I'm all she has, she said, her voice cracking completely. I know I took credit for your work. I know what I did. But please, just one recommendation. Something that says I'm not completely incompetent. I looked around our warehouse at my team, still working despite the late hour. Whiteboards covered with real innovation instead of buzzwords. People driven by merit, not manipulation. Sophie, I said, and she went quiet except for soft sniffles. You took credit for the Anderson account. You called me overwhelmed. You smiled while Edward gave me 5 minutes to pack up 6 years of work. I know, You took credit for other people's work. Now it's time to take responsibility for your own failure. That's the only recommendation I can give you. The call lasted exactly 5 minutes. I timed it. 3 days later, the news hit everywhere at once. Edward Collins steps down as CEO of Helios Systems. The press release was a masterclass in corporate euphemism, pursuing new opportunities, time for fresh leadership, grateful for his years of service. But everyone knew the truth. The board had given him a choice: resign with a shred of dignity or be fired for cause and lose everything. He chose resignation, but it was like choosing which cliff to jump from. The fall was the same. That evening, Margaret Collins called. Her voice sounded hollow but lighter somehow. "He's moving into the guest house in Evanston," she said. 35 years of marriage, and this is what finally broke us. Not his affairs. Not his ego that needed its own zip code. But watching him destroy you, someone who did nothing but make him successful, just for sport. That's when I knew the man I married was gone, if he ever existed. Margaret. Don't apologize. Don't comfort me. This is freedom, even if it's 30 years too late. That night, the converted warehouse in Fulton Market felt different. The Carter twins had strung up lights that made the concrete walls glow softly. Chloe had brought plants that somehow thrived in the industrial space. Ethan had set up a sound system that played quiet jazz while we worked. "We did it," Lila said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of champagne, not the cheap kind this time. Victoria had sent cases of the real stuff. "Did what?" I asked. "We won. David beat Goliath. The Empire struck back, but the rebels won anyway." Pick your metaphor. Ben Carter, the former maintenance supervisor from Helios who had joined us the week before, raised his mop in the air like a torch, the same gesture from that Tuesday, but this time it meant something else. "To second chances," he said, grinning. "And first-class revenge." Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. But I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about the new contract we had just landed, the one Helios had been chasing for 2 years. Orion Global. Their CEO had called personally. "We watched both press conferences," he said. "We saw how Helios treated the very people who built its success. We'd rather work with builders, not destroyers. Our valuation hit $50 million. Not bad for a company that started in my living room, surrounded by pizza boxes and panic." "It's not revenge," I told Lila, watching my team, my chosen family, working late because they wanted to, not because anyone was counting their hours. "It's just success. Revenge is just a side effect." But somewhere across town, Edward Collins sat alone in the guest house behind the mansion he could no longer afford, his empire reduced to rubble in less than a month. He was learning too late that when you give someone 5 minutes to pack up their life, sometimes they take everything that matters with them when they go. The champagne had gone flat by morning, but no one cared. We were still riding the high of our $50 million valuation when Olivia Grant walked through the doors of the converted warehouse in Fulton Market at 7:23 a.m., carrying a banker's box and wearing an expression I had never seen on her face before, determination mixed with something darker. "I need 5 minutes of your time," she said. The irony of that number wasn't lost on anyone. She set the box on my desk, a real desk now, bought secondhand from a liquidation sale, scarred but solid. "I've been Helios's legal director for 12 years. I've watched Edward destroy careers, break employment laws, cover up harassment. I documented everything." She opened the box, revealing folders meticulously labeled by date and violation type. Every illegal termination. Every hush money settlement. Every time he screamed at someone until they cried, then made me write a resignation for personal reasons. Daniel looked up from his laptop. "Why keep all that?" "Insurance," she said simply. "I always knew he'd turn on me too. And I was right." He's already telling the board that I should have prevented your walkout, that I failed my fiduciary duty. She pulled out a thick folder. This one's my favorite, 3 years of emails where he explicitly ordered me to ignore legal protocols. Then she looked straight at me, her gray eyes sharp behind designer glasses. I want to be your chief legal officer. In exchange, I'll make sure Edward never works in tech again. My revenge might be colder than yours, but it's been fermenting for 12 years. I know where every body is buried, because I helped dig the graves. Lila gave a low whistle. That's dark. That's business, Olivia replied. He taught me that. She smiled faintly. Now I'll show him what happens when you make enemies who know your secrets. I looked at the woman who had sat silently in that boardroom during my humiliation and realized she hadn't been complicit, she'd been collecting evidence. Welcome to Aurora Tech, I said. Olivia's first official act was to schedule the settlement meeting. Neutral ground, she insisted. Hilton downtown Chicago, conference room 12. It's $800 an hour, and Edward's paying for it. The meeting was set for Thursday at 10 a.m. I arrived early. The room was exactly as soulless as I expected, leather chairs that tried too hard, a glossy table polished like a mirror, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city Edward once thought he owned. He arrived 15 minutes late, a power play that might have worked when he still had power to play with. But the man who walked in wasn't the Edward Collins who had slammed his palm on a conference table. This version looked deflated, his Armani suit hanging off a frame that had lost too much weight to stress. His lawyer, Mark Turner, looked equally exhausted. Let's make this quick, Mark said, sliding a folder across the table. Mr. Collins is prepared to offer $1.5 million, full benefits continuation for 24 months, and immediate vesting of all stock options. Olivia leaned forward. Plus a written statement acknowledging that the termination was handled inappropriately and a non-disparagement clause that goes both ways. Edward's jaw tightened, that familiar tell, but he nodded. The man who had never apologized, never admitted fault, was about to sign a document acknowledging his own failure. The room was silent except for the soft scratch of pens on paper. Edward's signature was smaller than the bold scrawl I remembered, his hand trembling slightly as he passed the document to me. Our eyes met. No words were exchanged, but entire conversations passed between us in that silence. His eyes said, "You destroyed me." Mine replied, "You destroyed yourself." His said, "I gave you everything." Mine answered, "You gave me 5 minutes." When I endorsed the check, $1.2 million, more money than my parents had seen in their lifetime, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just emptiness, the hollow calm of winning a war that never should have been fought. Edward stood to leave, then paused at the door. For a moment I thought he might speak, might finally say something real. But Collins' men didn't apologize. They just retreated to lick their wounds in private. After he left, Olivia pulled out her phone and showed me something that made my breath catch. Security footage from Helios, dated the day before Edward's resignation. Tom from security sent this, she said quietly. He thought you should see it. The grainy video showed Edward standing in what used to be my office, now completely empty. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m. He was alone, speaking to the empty room. The camera had no sound, but Olivia explained, he stood there for 20 minutes. Tom could read his lips for part of it. He kept saying, "I gave her 5 minutes. She took everything." "He's wrong," I said softly. "He took everything from himself. I just refused to go down with his ship." Olivia nodded. "Tom wanted you to know something else. He's the one who made sure the cameras captured everything that Tuesday, every angle of the boardroom, the walkout, all of it. He said watching you stay composed while Edward lost control was the best thing he's seen in 15 years of security work." My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, "Can you meet?" Important. I found her at a downtown Lakeview cafe, the kind that charges $12 for a latte to people who believe price equals quality. She looked different, younger somehow, though she'd aged years in the last month. I filed for divorce this morning, she said without preamble. Served him papers at Lakeshore Country Club. During the board meeting. Maximum witnesses, maximum humiliation. Margaret. Don't pity me, she cut in. This is 35 years overdue. She stirred her overpriced coffee with deliberate calm. I excused his cruelty as strength, his affairs as stress relief, his destruction of careers as business. But watching him destroy you, someone who only made him successful, just because he could, that's when I realized I'd been enabling a monster. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of legal documents. I'm taking half of everything. The houses, the investments, his precious wine collection he loved more than his family. My lawyer says the prenup won't hold, too many documented affairs. What about Ryan? I asked quietly. Margaret's face darkened. Ryan chose his side. He could have stood by you, but instead he asked you to absorb humiliation so his father could stay comfortable. He's exactly what I raised him to be, a coward who confuses compliance with loyalty. She stood to leave, then paused. The Collins dynasty took 3 generations to build. Edward destroyed it in 5 minutes, the same 5 minutes he gave you. There's poetry in that, don't you think? As she walked away, I realized the Collins empire hadn't just crumbled, it had imploded. Edward lost his company, his reputation, his marriage, his legacy, all because he couldn't resist humiliating the one person who had only ever made him successful. The settlement check cleared the next day. $1.2 million sat in my account, feeling both like justice and like blood money. I stared at the number on my banking app. 6 months earlier, it would have felt impossible. Now it was just another line item in a much bigger story, seed money for something that had already outgrown me. The warehouse no longer looked like the abandoned shell we'd moved into half a year ago. The flickering fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by warm LED panels that Daniel swore improved productivity and mental health. The suspicious stain was covered with smooth industrial epoxy that Lila picked to match our logo colors. We had real furniture now, standing desks, ergonomic chairs, even a small kitchen that didn't smell like neglect. Mom, look! Ella called from the homework corner, holding up a math test. 98%. Lila helped me with formulas last week. This had become our rhythm, Ella doing homework after school while Daniel worked. The Carter twins taught her coding basics. Chloe helped with her science projects. We weren't just a company anymore. We were a family, the kind corporate culture always promises but never delivers. $75 million valuation as of this morning, Ethan announced, updating the celebration board. Yes, we had one now, covered with wins big and small. And Richardson Industries just signed, 40 employees, 12 major clients. 40 employees. People who had chosen us not for stability, we were still a startup, after all, but for the culture. They'd watched the press conference, heard about the walkout, and knew exactly what we stood for. Every resume came with a note about wanting to work somewhere that valued people over profits. Lila's parents had visited last week from Mumbai, performing a traditional blessing ceremony in our conference room. Her mother had touched my shoulder and said, "You gave my daughter purpose beyond a paycheck. That is worth more than any valuation." I was reviewing contracts when the door opened. Ryan stood there, a ghost of the man I'd married. He'd lost weight, but not the healthy kind. Grief seemed to have hollowed him out. In his hand were papers I recognized instantly. Divorce documents. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice small. We went to the break room, the nice one, with real chairs and a coffee machine that actually worked. He sat across from me, the papers between us like a border we were about to make official. "I've been in therapy," he began. Twice a week for 4 months. Learning about family dynamics, attachment, enabling, words I didn't even know existed when we got married. That's good, Ryan. I should have stood up for you, he said quickly, the words rushing out like they'd been bottled up since that Tuesday. When Dad humiliated you, I should have been in that room defending you. I should have walked out with you. Instead, I came home and asked you to fix his mess. I chose comfort over courage, familiarity over what was right. He pushed the papers toward me. I'm not asking for forgiveness or another chance. I know that ship has sailed. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost, what I threw away because I couldn't stand up to him. Are you still at Helios? I asked. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Nobody's at Helios. It was absorbed by Summit Technologies last month. They kept the patents and fired everyone else. Dad's reputation made sure no one would buy it intact. We signed the papers in relative silence, just the scratch of pens and the hum of the coffee machine. In that same room where my team had mapped out Aurora Tech's future, I was signing away my past. Ryan stood to leave, then paused. I hope you find someone who sees your worth immediately, he said. Not after it's too late. Not after they've already lost you. Someone who stands up for you on Tuesday, not apologizes 6 months later. After he left, I sat there for a long moment, feeling the weight of ending a marriage that had probably been over long before Edward Collins gave me those 5 minutes. But there was peace in it, too. Clean endings make space for better beginnings. Olivia appeared in the doorway. You okay? Yeah, I said, closing my laptop. Just finishing a chapter. She smiled faintly. Thought you should see this. She handed me her phone. Edward's LinkedIn profile had been updated that morning. Independent business consultant. The listed address was one I recognized, a strip mall on the edge of town. His latest post was titled Leadership Through Adversity, The Importance of Decisive Action. It had 3 likes. I clicked on them. 2 were clearly fake accounts, and 1 was from someone trying to sell him marketing services. That's sad, I murmured. That's consequences, Olivia corrected. He works alone now, she continued, from a rented office above a tax prep place. No clients. No prospects. No future in tech. His reputation is so toxic even desperate startups won't touch him. I thought of the Edward who once stood at the head of his mahogany conference table, emperor of his own domain, counting down my professional execution like a stopwatch. Now he had infinite time, and nothing left to fill it with. No employees to intimidate. No board to impress. No family waiting at home. Just an empty office and LinkedIn posts no one read. Do you feel bad for him? Olivia asked. No, I said truthfully. I feel nothing. He's just a cautionary tale now, a footnote in Aurora Tech's origin story. That afternoon, we held our weekly all-hands meeting, not in a sterile boardroom full of people scrolling their phones, but in our open workspace, where everyone was actually present. The Carter twins presented their new framework. Chloe outlined our client growth trajectory. Tom, who was now officially our chief morale officer, announced Friday's team lunch. Looking around at these 40 people, people who had chosen to build something with us, I thought about those 5 minutes. How they had once felt like an ending, but were really the beginning. Edward had given me 5 minutes to pack up my career. In return, I gained a real family, a company built on respect, and the understanding that when you refuse to accept humiliation, dignity is waiting on the other side. Hey, Lila said, appearing beside me. Victoria just called. Bloomberg wants to feature us, the company that rose from a 5-minute firing. I smiled. Tell them yes. But make sure they know we're not a story about a firing. We're a story about what happens when good people refuse to let small people make them smaller. The warehouse buzzed with energy, the sound of progress, of people who believed in what they were building. Somewhere across town, Edward Collins sat in his strip mall office, probably refreshing LinkedIn to see if anyone had liked his latest post about resilience. The difference between us wasn't that I'd won and he'd lost. It was that I had learned 5 minutes could build an empire, while he was still trying to understand how 5 minutes had destroyed one. If this story of corporate karma had you rooting for justice, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment? When 22 people silently stood up and followed her out, turning humiliation into a revolution. What was yours? Tell us in the comments below, and don't miss more incredible stories of justice, courage, and redemption.